Sally, thanks so much for helping Kiero and for giving us your point of view, which is always super valuable. And you as a part of the network of sustainable brands, I mean, we are really happy to have you on board for this. We've seen many discussions for the last days and weeks about capitalism as an economic model losing its license to operate. And the coronavirus seems to be like another reason not to put the system back into question. But the big question is, of course, how to move towards a new model. Which are the bases that we need to make happen to transform the economic system? Which are the changes and at which levels are necessary the changes to advance towards a new model, and how to take advantage and channel at scale the successful experiences we already have, no? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that coming out of the COVID-19 disruption and real difficulties that we're experiencing, I think that the natural tendency would be to rebuild the model we had before, because people instinctively want to go back to that they know. However, I think that would be a huge mistake, and I am hopeful that that might not happen, because I think that there have been signs during this crisis of how an alternative economy might function. So an alternative economy that is looking out for the most vulnerable and the ones that are so impacted by this virus. So here in the UK, we have an amazing furlough scheme where the government is paying people's salaries just as they've been laid off. So in other words, right now, we're seeing a different kind of model. We're seeing an economic model that is supporting the vulnerable, that is looking after those that can't necessarily access finance themselves. And we're seeing bold government action, which is obviously, we're all stuck at home, but that's because it's keeping us safe. And so we've seen an economic model secondarily then that is being dictated by bold government action, which has never been the purview of capitalism. It's always, well, the markets will get onto it. And I think there's a kind of awakening amongst everybody as individuals that life is much more than financial metrics. I think above all, COVID-19 will be a really human story, and an economic model that takes no account of our humanity, I think, is flawed. So I think that coming out of this crisis, we in the sustainability movement, and by that I mean, you know, pioneering businesses, pioneering brands that can see the need for a different economic model, we can point to some of the changes that we've seen over the last few weeks and suggest, well, why don't we build from these? And so instead of just going back to what we had, which was an economic system driven by short-term profit maximization, by purely financial metrics, why don't we start to recast the goals of the economic system so that they are much broader? And to be honest, all of our work, all of my work suggests that unless the goals of the economic system change to incorporate environmental value, to incorporate societal value, then we're not going to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And, you know, at Forum, we call this the need to have goals that describe a regenerative economy, an economy based upon equality and equity. And I think coming out of this crisis, we have an opportunity to recast the goals of the system so that they are goals that promote economic development, but in a way that also builds social capital, looks after our most vulnerable, protects our environment, and in other words, is an economy that can deliver the Sustainable Development Goals.
I'm listening to you, and these days I'm hearing many people saying that now we are going to become better humans, no? Do you
Yeah.
think, and maybe probably it's true, and this will make us better persons, no? But do you think that we need to be more rebels? Because if we are better persons, but we don't rebel against the system, you are saying maybe everything is going to be the same. I don't know.
I think that unless we make active choices coming out of this crisis, we'll just go back to where we were.
Exactly.
And that is bad news on multiple fronts. Probably the reason why that is most alarming is this COVID crisis is one of many shocks that we're going to experience over the next decade. And if we just go back to where we were, we've built no resilience, we've built no capacity to withstand the next crisis. And what we should be saying is, okay, so what can we learn? And this is what I've written about. What can we learn from how we respond to this moment in a way that means that when we have the next shock, which could be a climate shock, it could be another pandemic, we have resilience. You know, we're much better able to withstand this crisis. And that's got inherent logic to it. So who would want to go back to what you had when you know it wasn't working? So if you think about how systems change and how systemic change happens, then right now, in this moment in time, we're in a process of really accelerated systems change. Everything is changing around us. Everything is disrupted. We're living with ambiguity, uncertainty. We can't predict what's even going to happen tomorrow. And so that is a classic sort of systems accelerated change process. And so there's an incredible dynamism in that system. And so the opportunity we have as we come out of this crisis is to harness all that change, harness all that uncertainty, harness that energy, and actually create something better.
That's beautiful. I hope you are right, Sally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's interesting. I don't know whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. I do know that believing you can create a story you want to hear and believing that you can create a future that you want to live in is possible.
Definitely. What do you think? Because on your expertise, we are talking a lot about the Green New Deal in Europe and the United States, no? How do you think that all this experience about the COVID is going to impact to the investments that are needed to basically advance in a consistent way into that direction?
I do think that. I think the availability of capital expenditure as we come out of this is going to be a real concern. We've seen governments around the world just push billions of dollars into our response, and I think there's going to be a real question about liquidity of markets. However, that question is more acute if we frame liquidity in our understanding of how the economy currently works. But if we were to sort of start to reconceptualize the economy, then, and for example, assign a value to natural assets, assign a value to building social equality, get serious about different business models, then that whole notion of access to finance might take a different meaning. Mm-hmm. But on the face of it, you know, you're looking at how much this response to COVID will have cost the global economy, and you're thinking, so where's the rest of the money going to come from? However, I think that is using the lens of the current economy, and I think my biggest piece of advice for anyone that wants to listen, but particularly governments, is they need to stop thinking about COVID and climate as separate issues. They are interconnected and they're the same. So climate actually is a public health issue. So how can all of the investment we've made in responding to COVID, how can the investment that we're going to continue to make to secure public health outcomes, how will that help us respond to a climate crisis? Because a climate crisis will manifest itself as a public health crisis. And I think that this compartmentalization that people have, which is, okay, we're fighting COVID here, and there's this climate thing over here, we don't have the bandwidth to go there. It's a false choice. They're not separate. And so the first step in understanding how do we solve simultaneously for public health and climate is to treat them as the same and interconnected, and understand what is it that we can do that solves simultaneously for climate and public health. So dealing with air quality has a public health benefit, it has a climate benefit. And I think coming out of this crisis, and again, this speaks to that sort of systems approach we take at Forum, understanding the world as an interconnected set of systems, not as linear systems, is going to be really critical.
Definitely, that's very good point. Actually, we've heard as well about some scientifics stating that actually the lack of biodiversity and that, of course, pollution, both things are really making the virus.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
So the one of the root causes for this virus was disregard of biodiversity and illegal trading in wildlife.
Exactly.
These things are not separate.
No. And it's incredible because some people are saying like, you think after the COVID, some clients of us are asking, so do you think that after the COVID, all the environmental is going to be forgotten and we are going to go for the social? And it's fun, no? I mean, those kind of questions, but of course, I mean, I think we still, a lot of didactic, needs to be made, no?
Yeah, and I think, Raquel, I've been asked that question a lot, and again, I think it's a false choice. I think to believe you can build social equality and equity without building environmental value, it's just insane.
Exactly.
These two things are inextricably linked, and as humans, we've just got a really slightly annoying tendency to just separate things when actually they're not separate. And the sooner people understand the interconnections, the better. And yes, that means that the world is messy and complicated. The world is messy and complicated, and we should just accept that. It's messy, it's complicated, it's ambiguous. That's okay. That's life.
Definitely. So our last question on the general side, Sally, when we speak about the sustainable development strategies and plans of companies and brands, when we speak about SDGs, I'm sad to say that I think I haven't heard about the SDGs in media since all this started. No, what do you think is going to happen there when we speak about the action on the plans of the companies specifically?
Yeah, I think we're going to see two kinds of response. I think for those organizations that already understand the sustainable development imperative, they'll just pick this back up because they'll understand that actually ensuring the health and safety of their workforce, ensuring the vibrancy of their communities is not only how they can help in the post-COVID recovery phase, but it's also how they'll deliver the SDGs. And they will pick this back up when they come out of crisis management and business continuity planning. They'll pick it up, but I do think there's going to be a swathe of businesses who are just going to be fighting for survival, and the chances of them sort of picking up this conversation whilst they're looking at massive redundancy programs and running out of cash. I mean, I think the economic impact of this crisis is going to be acute and will mean that in some quarters, I suspect progress will slow.
Definitely. Regarding collaboration, you were recently writing an article. You were saying COVID has driven governments, organizations, and businesses to radically reorganize their operating models. You were speaking about that. How can this impact how can this impact be real on new forms of business collaboration and investment?
Yeah, so I was talking earlier about some of the positive aspects of our response to COVID, and one of those is the genuine public-private partnerships we've seen emerge. So from Boots here in the UK having testing facilities in their car parks, to manufacturers switching production lines to hand sanitizers, to ventilators, and all of that, you know, rhetoric of it's just too hard. We've just seen actually public-private partnerships come into their own, and they're really possible. So that again for me is a keep. So let's keep that. And then we've also seen that pre-competitive space where you've got often what are competitive brands, they're now working together. So let's keep that too. So that pre-competitive space has expanded. So I think we've seen flourishing public-private sector partnerships. We've seen flourishing partnerships with community groups. We've seen an expansion of that pre-competitive space. Let's keep all of that, because all of that is really important for sustainable development.
So in this context, how can we accelerate systemic change?
So by systemic change, I am taking that to mean, how can we create a new way of doing things? Emerging out of this crisis, how can, going back to what we were discussing, how can we avoid going back to what we had and create something new? So systemic change is the emergence of a new way of operating, a new way of organizing. And the way you create systemic change is to adopt certain is to drive certain innovations in key areas where there's a willingness to do things differently. And so this is what we've been talking about. So if we can continue to grow public-private partnerships, if we can continue to shift societal norms around public health, around the value of community, if we can continue to use government policy to protect the most vulnerable, if we can demonstrate different forms of economic value creation, these are all strategies that would drive systemic change. Because systemic change happens when societal norms shift, where access to finance shifts, where policy shifts, and that's government action, where you see new forms of collaboration. So we've got all the ingredients right now. We just need to keep focusing on pushing those forward as we emerge from this crisis.
We have the ingredients. We need to make the recipe real, yeah?
Yeah, but I think we know what the recipe looks like. And in the end, I think the biggest and most fundamental ingredient of systemic change is mindset shift, and is the willingness of particularly leaders, those with influence and power, to do things differently. So we should be calling on all of those different actors in business, government, civil society with power and influence to do something different.
And Sally, I would like to have your point of view as well on some more specific questions, knowing about your experience and background of work in the different dimensions of what a sustainable brand is. So regarding to supply chain and operations, I remember that at Forum you actually were working great on all what was related to net positive, and actually COVID is a healthy dose of reality to what resilient organizations mean, no? And also regarding vulnerability faced to globalization in infrastructures, in supply chain, etc., we are going to see a lot of changes. So which are the main strategic changes that we will see in supply chains?
Yeah, really good question. Again, I've probably got two answers. I've got the answer that I hope will come to pass, and then there's another scenario. And the reason why I think there are two scenarios is because global supply chains right now are under phenomenal strains, so the like of which I've never seen. So if you think about the apparel system, people have cancelled their orders. You've got workers with no access to income. so the whole apparel system is, in a really difficult place. And then you've got a global food system reliant on smallholder farmers who have no education, no protection against COVID. And if COVID rips through sub-Saharan Africa in the way that it definitely could, then we're going to see food shortages. So the potential negative impact of COVID on global supply chains is profound. And I think what we really need businesses to do is to really lean into their supply chains. So to create meaningful partnerships with their suppliers, to educate their suppliers. There's a lot of fake news around COVID-19, to ease payment terms, to be creative with payment terms, to be creative with production regimes. So if there is a break in the supply chain, can brands, food manufacturers create temporary processing facilities right at the point of origin? And so, in other words, I think that what will be needed will be a profound and real commitment to supply chains, availability of finance, long-term partnerships, creativity, and not leaving your suppliers high and dry, which is what the current economic model tends to encourage. And I think this is probably finally where industry platforms will be really important. So Consumer Goods Forum, WEF, these are all platforms that I think probably have the convening power to ensure that their members work together to secure the resiliency of these supply chains. But certainly switching suppliers, short-term profit maximization, no flexibility in payment terms, no access to capital, they are all the things that will just exacerbate the current fault lines in global supply chains.
Do you think there may be a return to local supply chains?
Yeah, I do. I think that we will see some more localization. I think we were seeing that anyway, because it's a response to the desire sometimes for local economic generation, reduction in food miles. I think we will see a probably more sustainable balance between kind of global and local. I hope we will, because that actually is a good thing. But I think that the story of all, of smallholder farmers, migrant workers, apparel workers in bonded labour is a story that has yet to hit the mainstream, and it's going to, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, very clear. Thanks for that, Sally. And purpose-wise, purpose commitments are being put to the test. So new contexts of inequality, unemployment, vulnerable groups as older people, young people without job opportunities, people without access maybe to health insurance. How is going to change corporate or brand purpose, this reality? What do we must talk about from now on? How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you will have seen this, so many brands hide behind this whole purpose conversation. It's a bit of a facade to kind of get on with what they want to do. And I don't know, I find the whole purpose conversation slightly disingenuous, and often I don't take it that seriously, because I just think a lot of these purpose statements that they're just meaningless. I think what I really want to see are brands and businesses asking themselves, how can we create value as well as putting more back into environment and society than we take out? So how can we be net positive? So I think kind of just clutching onto your purpose isn't really getting to the root cause of what you can do as a brand. So how as a brand can you be as socially useful as possible, and do your bit in the ways that make sense to kind of build the resilience of our environment. And so that then might manifest itself as your purpose statement. But brands tend to come and say our purpose is, without thinking through, okay, where do they have the biggest difference? Where can they make the biggest possible impact? And I think even more so coming out of this crisis, brands and businesses need to be really clear where can they make the biggest possible possible positive social and environmental impact, and concentrate on those areas and not get distracted.
I like very much what you say, actually, Sally. I don't know, what do you think about businesses in this period? No, because I agree that we've seen so many nice action taken, no, by some businesses, but as well, I think that I wonder if you think that brands and businesses and corporations, have we been up to expectations of that purpose that at some point we stated, no? And I like a lot what you say. I was writing about it the other day in a newspaper, in a Spanish newspaper, no? I mean, this thing about being or doing the biggest possible positive impact, no? Do you think that corporations and businesses, we've done the biggest possible positive impact during this period? And do you think we are going to be able to do it for the recovery? How do you say this? Have we learned?
I think it's possible, particularly on the social side, because C19 is such a human story. And I think that as individuals, we've been rocked to the core. I mean, never in our lifetimes have we, we're getting used to daily death tolls of thousands of people dying. I mean, it's like our grandparents when they lived through the Second World War. And I think that there is a sort of a really heightened awareness of the vulnerability of us all as individuals and the essential essence of us as humans, if you will. And I can't believe that there'll be a scenario where business and brands come out of this and just switch back into thinking about people as numbers on a P&L. I think that this crisis has awakened a really deep understanding of what it means to be human. And so being socially useful, I think, it may even be a prerequisite coming out of this crisis. I don't know, maybe that is a bit too optimistic. But I think that the world has been so shocked to the core and our vulnerability has been so exposed that to lose that understanding, because this has just exposed our vulnerability. People are dying in their thousands on a daily basis. I think that there'll be a much heightened awareness of the value of us as people. And then I hope that by talking about interconnections of how a thriving, healthy human is dependent on a thriving, healthy planet, we might make that connection and we might come out of this crisis with a different awareness.
You were talking before about innovation, no? I think we've seen very rapid transformations these days, from many companies, maybe simple ones, but product-wise, and they are building, but they are manufacturing what they are doing, It was like very, very quick, with a very impactful response to what is needed now, So what can we learn from this innovation-wise? You work very well as well on the innovation side at Forum, so give us your view on the innovation, what we've learned on innovation, what can we apply?
So I think the most important lesson is that for any innovations to scale, you need the right enabling context. You need access to capital, you need the right policy framework. And the reason why the innovations that we've seen, so switching entire manufacturing facilities, different delivery models of goods and services to market, that is working because the government has stepped in with the right policy levers, people have stepped in with access to capital. And so we've created enabling conditions in which these innovations have been able to scale. And that's why innovations typically don't scale and they fail, is because an innovation in of its own right, it gets thrown into a system. Any system has inherent energy. It will just gobble up the innovation. It will just literally, the system will kind of drown the innovation. The innovation will just go away. But what we've seen is innovations against the backdrop of the right set of enabling conditions. And that is critical for any innovation to scale.
Yeah, very smart. Thanks very much, Sally. It was a joy to see you as well.
Yeah, likewise. Great to see you both.
Thanks.
Okay, have a good day.